This third part covers the move to Bicton, the second phase under the ownership of Bob Freeman, and the confusion regarding Stuart Roy. We now come to the next stage in the Spar saga. This concerns a Robert Freeman. Robert was actually born as Robin Montier Day in 1928 in Plumpton, Sussex, but at age 13 one morning in August 1942 he told his mother that he was going for a cycle ride. He had with him his coin collection, a small amount of cash, a map, a compass, and some emergency rations. "Goodbye," he called to his mother as he rode away. "Goodbye," she called after him. It would be 13 years before they saw each other again. It became a national story, and in the news of the world a reward of £200 was offered for news of his whereabouts, all to no avail. His exploits in the intervening years until he turned up as Bob Freeman in Hope Valley are written up in detail in his fascinating and entertaining autobiography published in 1999, entitled Half a Millionaire. It's sadly now out of print, but copies often turn up in eBay and AB Books. In the early 1950s, Bob was prospering, and amongst his other businesses, in 1951, set up a garage by the name of the Quick Service Station in Hope Valley, next to the Tank of Alarms, just up from the church, and in 1958 he purchased a field opposite and put up an industrial building for a large workshop and showroom. As I mentioned before, in 1959 Eric Hillage's business was in difficulties, and he could no longer afford to pay his men. He approached his neighbour Bob and sold him the stone tips on his land and his lorry for £150. This photo, taken in the 1960s, shows the Tank of Alarms where Eric was living and the petrol pumps of the quick service station just beyond. Bob and his wife Dorothy were both good business people. They bought a new lorry and soon obtained orders for loads of stone from local builders and the Forestry Commission. They then sent samples of the white spar to the Department of Scientific Industrial Research, DSIR, who soon came back with good news that if they could wash and grade the product, they would almost certainly find them a ready market. They set up washers and screen washing plants on the quick service site and got to work. The DSIR came up with purchases for the Spar in England and in particular Row Webb's of Glasgow. In 2024, Rob Webb still exists and still sells Spar, although not from Hope Valley. So together with the stone being sold to local builders and the reincarnated Spar business, Hope Valley Minerals were going well again. The best Spar was worked out in about 5 years, but still provided a useful income well into the 1990s. Bob and his wife went on to form a string of other successful businesses, but he's perhaps best known for rescuing and restoring many of Shrewsbury's attractive old buildings, for which he won numerous awards. In 2015, while researching the history of the Hope Valley Spar business, I wrote to Bob, and he and his wife Dorothy invited me and my wife Rosalind to visit them in their home at Pimley Manor. We had an enjoyable time exchanging information about the start and eventual end of the Hope Valley Spar businesses. At this point, my wife Rosalind and I decided to investigate the Stuart Roy connection. My Auntie May had given his name as grandfather's best customer, and Stuart Roy appeared in his bank book. We started by looking at the relevant censuses, but to our surprise there was no such person mentioned. The next step was to do a newspaper search. This came up trumps, since in 1923 editions of the Grantham Times there were adverts for Sparkling Spar, Stuart Roy and Company, Barlaston Staffs. We first followed up the limited company route and discovered in the January 1924 record of the chemist and druggist, Stuart Roy and Company Limited, capital £100, objects to carry on the business of manufacturers, producers, quarries, refiners, store suppliers, importers, exporters and distributors of and dealers in chemicals, minerals, salts, acids, alkalis, drugs, or manures of every description, etc. The directors are C. McNeill, D.H. McNeill and S.R. McNeill. Registered office, the mill, Barlaston Staffs. They were certainly ambitious, with a capital of only £100. Further research uncovered that the company was set up in 1921. We tried to look up Stuart Roy McNeill in the 1911 census, but there was no record of him. This was perplexing. But eventually we discovered Colin McNeill, 1876 to 1939, Douglas Hines McNeill, 1910 to 1988, and Stuart Roy McNeill, 1913 to 1982. So Stuart Roy wasn't born until 1913, and was therefore only 8 when the company was set up in 1921. And Colin McNeill would have been about 50 when grandfather's Spar business was at its peak in 1925. So Colin McNeill had named the Spar business after his youngest son. The McNeills were significant businessmen. When Colin McNeill was buying the Spar, he was living at the Hill, shown in this photo. His son Douglas McNeill also became involved in a number of businesses, and in 1941 was living in the smart house shown in this photo, the White Lodge, Dittenshaw. In 1948, Stuart Roy was living in the Beeches, Barlaston Old Road, Trentham. I have not been able to find a photo of this since most of the houses are now only numbered. So the person that my grandfather was in contact with was actually Colin McNeill. Grandfather may have known this, but to Auntie May he was Stuart Roy. This photo shows Stuart McNeill on the left and Douglas McNeill on the right, but I couldn't find a photo of Colin McNeill. The Stuart Roy Company survived for a long time. Some of the references I came across were 1928 Kelly's Directory, Stuart Roy and Company, Metal Merchants, Barlaston. 1953 Advert by Stuart Roy and Company Limited in a trade journal for high quality colours, glazes, body stains, Adderley Works, Cheadle Staffs. 1987 Long-eared bats registered at Brookhouse Road as part of an environmental study, probably in the disused building Adderley Mill on the road to Adderley west of Cheadle. In the year 2000 the name was changed to Goonbreen Ceramic Products Limited, Stephen Street, Austell, St Cornwall, and were also present at 6 Blythe Park, Cresswell Lane, Blythe Bridge, Cresswell, Stoke-on-Trent. 2006 shows last annual returns, then various resignations. And in 2008 the company was dissolved via voluntary strike-off. I'd like to acknowledge the following people: my Auntie May for her encyclopedic knowledge of Hope Valley, Mr. and Mrs. Freeman for the second phase of the Spar business, Nancy Morris, a relative, Beryl, who was brought up by Auntie Polly, George Peake, our American cousin, Tim Cockin for Barlaston information, Andrew Bull for Barlaston information, Michael Shaw, author of the Lead, Copper and Barytes Mines of Shropshire, and Barry Peabody of Bent Launt. I have masses of information regarding Hope Valley and its families, but I've tried to concentrate on factors relevant to the Spar business. This is the end of part 3.